Welcome to my channel. My name is Josh Christian, and today I want to talk about the political left, or more specifically, the political far left, and how their extremist views on Israel are changing the political landscape here in the United States. Let's get started. Liberal leaders in the West have been pressed sort of between a rock and a hard place. And nowhere is this more obvious than when you watch Joe Biden or Kamala Harris at press conferences. It's actually amazing to watch the sort of mental gymnastics happening behind the scenes because on one hand, the classical liberal view has always been pro-Israel. America as a whole, whether you're far left or far right or in the middle or some sort of moderate, we have always, as a country, been supportive of Israel. Now, there's a bunch of different reasons for that I'm not going to get into, but the big one is military support in the Middle East. The United States is basically one of those nations that wants to be involved in every single global major war and conflict. And the reason for that, of course, is that the United States sees itself as the world police. Now, you may not like that. You may think the United States needs to get uninvolved in global conflicts. And you know what? I would agree with you. And I like right now that far left liberals, especially at a lot of these colleges, have become anti-war, especially anti-war in Palestine. I can actually appreciate that. I can get behind that. I like the idea of the United States pulling out of international conflicts, not funding Israel's war as much as we currently are, not funding the war in Ukraine as much as we are. I'd like if we pulled out of all international conflicts. But the simple reality is that that's not going to happen. The United States has a military surplus budget, and that's the money that typically ends up getting shuffled to Ukraine and shuffled to Israel and other countries and other small conflicts. Now, one thing we have seen is that if the United States does not get involved in Israel, if we stay out of the conflict entirely, there's a very real reality that parts of the Middle East, especially when we look at like terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, like the Houthis, they may take advantage of our lacking support and start attacking Israel, in a much more serious way than they are now. And then Israel, because they won't have the money to defend themselves as well, will have to be more offensive. I heard somebody the other day on Twitter say it's a good thing that Israel has the Iron Dome, because if Israel didn't have the Iron Dome, if the United States wasn't funding the Iron Dome, they would have taken much more serious and severe casualties than just intercepting 99% of the missiles or whatever. And if that had happened, they would have responded much more aggressively to the attackers, meaning there's a very real chance that Israel would have resorted to small nuclear weapons. If you start attacking Israel and there's nothing they can do to defend themselves, it'll be sort of like an animal that's cornered. And when you corner an animal, they get offensive because it's a fight or flight situation. Israel can't leave, they can't fight, so they'll be forced into fighting. So to a certain degree, when we fund the Iron Dome, when we fund Israel, that does further peace. Because if we didn't, they would take more severe casualties, and of course, they would respond much more aggressively. And in fact, it would probably start World War III. So to some degree, when you look at it in some lights, it's actually furthering world peace by funding Israel's military, at least their defensive military systems. So I could see that. I could see that worldview. But on the other hand, I could also see the Palestinian view that they believe that Israel is an apartheid state. I don't believe that personally, but I can see their argument. And if you go back and you study the history of Israel and Palestine, there's no debating that there is not a clear answer. I wish there was. I wish I could just sit here and say, I'm pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, but the people that tend to pick sides and only say, I support this side or that side, tend to miss the full picture. They tend to not have studied the full history. Both sides have done a lot of good, and both sides have done a tremendous amount of bad. And if you want further evidence of the bad things, even recently, look at Hamas. Hamas attacked Israel, kills 1,200 innocent people just going to a concert, and in fact killed some Muslims in that group as well, by the way. Killed some Christians and killed a lot of Jews. It would be so easy to say that's where the bad ended, but that's not really true, is it? Because we know Israel has had sort of an overreactionary response to that. And I guess some people's more cynical view is that Israel didn't like what happened, sure, but they took advantage of it. They let what happened happen, and then they advantageously started to barrage the West Bank and Gaza with missiles in order to hopefully wipe out enough people to push them back. Now, I think there's different views on this. I don't necessarily agree that that's point blank what Israel's doing, but it is true that in their response to the 1,200 people being killed, they've killed many multitudes more than that. And I can't stand by and support that and say, well, that's a good thing too. No, I think all war is bad. I think all killing is bad. And ultimately, this is a failure of the United States. The United States right now has incredibly weak leadership. I don't think anybody would debate that. I think a lot of far left liberals are actually very unhappy with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. The media tries to spin it like all liberals love Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but I just don't think that's true, because most of the college students that I talk to, most of my young friends who are in college or who are, let's be honest, kind of leaning liberal due to the educational system, they tend to not like Joe Biden. They say that he's in the pocket of Israel and he doesn't really have any interest of the Palestinian people at heart. So they have their view. The conservatives, which, I lean more conservative, we have our view, and that's okay. But what's so interesting is that when you have weak leadership, everything gets worse, regardless of the view you have. That's the thing people aren't thinking about. They think that a very pro-Israel view would be bad for Palestine. It actually wouldn't, because they'd be able to broker deals more effectively. Like, let's say, for example, you had somebody like Trump or somebody that's hardcore, pro-right, pro-Israel in office. They could very easily show the Middle Eastern world strength. And in that strength of leadership, the Middle Eastern world says, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't attack Israel, because we know that the United States is going to get behind them and defend them, and there's going to be a lot of blowback. So in a way, we could avoid conflict by having strong leadership. Now, let's say that we had a Democrat in power, somebody like RFK, somebody that's a classical liberal who has true liberal values, but they're not like a far left extremist, maybe on like some social issues. But for the most part, RFK has a very balanced, moderate view on a lot of things. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that he was in power right now. Now, he's not necessarily pro-Israel. In fact, he has talked about the Palestinian conflict and how much he has a heart for the people and for what's happening over there in the Middle East. And I truly think, based on just listening to him, that he would be a strong leader. It's the opposite side of the coin of Trump, right? But I still think he would be able to end the conflict, because if you were to have a president that has a left view on this matter, maybe they wouldn't show strength in terms of their military prowess and say, look, we're going to be the ones that are going to bomb you back if you start hitting Israel. But instead, we could take the other approach where we have, let's say, somebody like Obama, for example, who says, we don't want to use military power against anybody in the Middle East. We don't necessarily want to just endlessly fund wars in Israel, but at the same time, we want to broker peace deals with the Muslim world. That perspective, that empathetic perspective, could also be very useful to ending this conflict. The problem with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the administration that they put in power is that they don't have either of those views. They're not left or right. They're right when it's least convenient, and they're left when it's least convenient. When it comes to funding Israel and talking about Israel, they're funded by AIPAC. They're funded by AIPAC just as much as all the conservatives are. In fact, there's no difference in funding between primary conservative and liberal parties. For the most part, it's only the extreme right and the extreme left bending in what they call the political horseshoe effect that hate Israel and that aren't being funded by AIPAC and that have their own completely distinctive views. And if you want proof of that, look at AOC. AOC's extremely far left, and she's very anti-Israel. And then you have like Nick Fuentes on the right, who's extremely far right, and they're sort of meeting in the middle on their hatred for Israel. And I think that's the wrong approach too. But when we look at Kamala Harris and when we look at Joe Biden, we look at their administration's views, they shift and change pretty drastically depending on who's asking the questions. I saw a press conference recently with Joe Biden just a few days ago where they asked him about Israel, and he gives you these really wishy-washy, nothing answers. He can't just stand up and say, I defend Israel, and the other side better watch out. He also can't stand on the other side in good conscience and say, you know what, I condemn the actions of Israel and Palestine, and I think they need to calm down and try to work to broker a peace deal. He doesn't have the best of either party's views. He has the worst of both. He's taking the money from AIPAC, he's taking the support from the Jewish world, while simultaneously not supporting Israel, while at the same time not supporting Palestine or trying to broker peace deals. He's just sitting in the middle, and we have this from this entire administration. It's just incredibly weak leadership. We can't keep straddling the fence like this as the war escalates, because you have to take a stance of, okay, we're going to hit back hard and scare these people, Or, okay, we're going to try to take a moderate view. We're going to try to ease off on the funding of Israel until they slow down. If we don't have leadership that's capable of doing that, this entire conflict, I guarantee it, this whole conflict is going to lead to a greater global conflict. These small little regional conflicts we see in the Middle East are always affected by global geopolitics. Always. Iran's military right now is actually much weaker than it's been in the past. And the reason for that is because Russia is so busy fighting their war in Ukraine, which, I'm not going to say they're losing. They are winning it, but they are winning it much slower at a much greater cost than they had expected. And they have less money, less resources, less military infrastructure that they're able to send to Iran. If you don't already know, a large amount of Iran's military infrastructure has been either literally sent from Russia or funded, via proxy from Russia. So what we're seeing right now, effectively, is Iran is weak. They have resources that they've built up and they haven't had any major wars for a long time. But a lot of that stuff is outdated. A lot of their military is not very well trained. And when we consider that, yeah, they're weaker than they've ever been, at least in a long time, because again, Russia is too distracted with their war in Ukraine to keep and continue funding Iran. Now, I'll admit that it's a little bit convenient for Israel. I'm not going to say Israel propagated or they've orchestrated any of this, because that would be a completely ridiculous conspiracy theory, but it is convenient for them. It does work out to their benefit when you consider the fact that Russia can't fund Iran anymore. What a perfect time to go to war with Iran when they don't have their traditional backing and, of course, munitions coming in from Russia. Now, I have heard some people make kind of a good argument saying, look, we spend $3.8 billion on Israel's military infrastructure every year. If we spent that same amount of money on any other country, whether it be Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, if we spent that on those countries, they would gladly welcome us in with open arms. They would let us put military bases there. They would basically do anything that we ask. And there probably is some truth to that. I won't deny that. If we started giving Jordan $4 billion a year, they'd say, hey, put your bases wherever you want. I'm fine with it. So a lot of liberals have made that argument of, well, we could cut down that funding dramatically. We don't need to spend that $4 billion. We could spend $1 billion on Jordan and they'd probably give us the same strategic military position. But what they're not considering is what I talked about earlier. And that's that Israel is able to defend themselves effectively because of Iron Dome. If we pull funding on that, they're not going to be able to defend themselves. Other groups are going to take advantage of that. Even if it's not necessarily major countries like Iran or Saudi Arabia, terrorist groups are still going to take advantage of that. And as they do that, that's going to lead to greater conflicts. So in a way, our defending of Israel, our funding of their defense systems is keeping every side safe, including the Muslim world, at least to some extent or another. This is not a simple conflict. Anybody that tries to make it as simple as Israel good, Palestine bad, or Muslims good, Israel bad, all Zionists bad. Anybody that has those types of views are typically, let's be honest, they're low IQ people. This conflict has been going on for over 4,000 years. This is not new. It's been tit for tat from the beginning. Both sides have deep religious and political rights to what they claim is that land. Both sides make excellent points. Anybody that tries to oversimplify it is missing the point. The point is, we can't end the conflict. We can't. There is no way to. Brokering peace isn't about making everybody happy. But at the very least, through that strong leadership, we can allow cooler heads to prevail. And right now, that's not happening on either side. And with that weak leadership straddling the fence, we're basically enabling both sides to continue to escalate the conflict. And that's not in the best interest of Israel or of Palestine or of the entire Muslim world or of the world as a global interest. Because if we were to get into a conflict that leads to another world war, that's obviously going to be bad for everybody. So the only direction forward is strong leadership that either leans left or leans right and uses the best of either side's politics to try to end this conflict. The other thing, too, is that the United States is having an election upcoming very soon, and that is going to have huge ramifications on what happens in the Middle East. Are we going to further the situation where Israel feels like they have to constantly be on the offensive? Or are we going to provide them with enough strength that they can be defensive and not have to worry so much? I don't know, but I do know that that election, or at least the outcome of that election, is going to be of great global interest. Every nation is going to be watching to see what happens here in the United States, because that's going to affect war in Ukraine. That's going to affect Russia's economy. That's going to affect China and what they're doing to Taiwan right right now, their pressure on Taiwan, that's going to affect Israel and Palestine dramatically. I think that the conflict that's happening right now in Israel and Palestine is a travesty, and I'd like to see it ended. Regardless of which side ends it, I don't care. I don't think people need to care whether it's the left or the right. We just need to end this conflict, and we need intelligent, strong leaders to do that. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to like and subscribe down below for more content and news like this coming soon. See you on the next one.